So good afternoon. I'm speaking to plenty of people in here that I know. I'm Susan Carroll, and I'm the Managing Director of the Rotary Peace Center at Duke and UNC. Our center is a joint program between these two universities, bringing mid-career graduate students here from all over the world with the common goal of building a more peaceful world. Our speaker this afternoon, Marc Sommers, has spent his professional life as a peace builder. Across his career, he's blended peace building and diplomacy with field research and training. He's applied trust-based techniques in 22 war-affected countries to appreciate opposing perspectives and cultivate inclusion. Marc has a reputation for innovative research and evaluation methods. His subject areas include youth, conflict, violent extremism, education and emergencies, gender, governance, and exclusion. His geographic expertise ranges from Kosovo, Yemen, and Timor-Leste to West, Central, East, and the Horn of Africa. He served as a senior advisor for the U.S. Department of State and the Department of Defense and has extensive experience with USAID initiatives. Marc has also worked in Djibouti for the Intergovernmental Authority on Development on Violent Extremism and Countering Violent Extremism. He's taught for many years at the Fletcher School, has been a fellow at the U.S. Institute of Peace, the Wilson Center, and the Bellagio Center. He speaks a multitude of languages and is a member of the Ukraine Youth Expert Group. I'm delighted to welcome Marc to the Duke community this afternoon, and I'd like to point out that he was a Rotary Peace Scholar many years back, even before the Peace Center's program began. He currently works as a consultant in Washington, D.C. He's the author of 10 books and the recipient of 4 book awards. He will be talking to us about his latest book now, and he'll speak for about 25 minutes, and then there will be time for Q&A. And I would really like to thank the John Hope Franklin Center and the Duke Center for International Development for co-sponsoring this with us. So thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Susan, and thanks to the center. Well, I guess both centers. What I want to talk to you about is this book, and going to sort of hone in on popular culture and how it is exploited, how it is locally interpreted, but also exploited for the purposes of war, and then also used to help people adjust to the post-war peace. And the same pop culture figures. So do we have Bob Marley fans here, or Tupac fans, or Rambo fans? All right. I'm glad they're Rambo fans, because usually most of the crowds there aren't, but I'm glad there is. I put this slide in after I had started doing these presentations about this book, because some people would respond and sort of be hurt that I was talking about Bob Marley or Tupac, their heroes, in sort of that they were being applied to war, that people were upset about this. So this slide is really to remind people that pop culture superstars have local interpretations. And what happens, you can't predict what's going to happen on the ground. And I'll tell you that is certainly true from my experience in Sierra Leone, because what I learned was really quite profound. And most of it was entirely new. So, I guess the other thing I want to say is that pop culture figures are really important to people. This is not a small thing. Just to give a recent example, when Taylor Swift said, okay, we want Americans to register to vote, I think within 2 days, 35,000 Americans registered. So if this is a tight election next year, she could decide who wins. She's that important. That's an example of the influence, I think, of pop culture on people. So that's a famous kind of pose of Rambo. So the three that I'll be talking about are Bob Marley, Tupac Shakur, and John Rambo. I think one thing that I learned early on is I didn't even know that Rambo's first name was John when I started doing this. And sometimes Sierra Leoneans, because they feel like they know him so well, they'll just call him John. And I was like, John who? So, okay, so why is Marley? These are sort of larger global trends, and then we'll go to the local interpretation. But why is Marley so important to this day around the world? With people, everybody, a lot of people like to listen to Marley, but who really listens? Members of the underclass, people who feel alienated, people who are looking for a sense of validation for who they are and something to believe in, somebody who believes in them, somebody who can help them. So the most important song in the world by Marley is Get Up, Stand Up. Stand up for your rights. Don't give up the fight. Okay. And Marley is tied very closely with smoking marijuana. And the idea, marijuana is sacramental in the practice of the Rastafarian religion. And so you smoke this holy weed, right? That helps you realize where the injustice is in society. And also to realize how you're being held down. So we won't go into this, but he makes a lot of reference to Babylon. And Babylon is the status quo. And he has a song about bald heads, and bald heads are black people in Jamaica who cut their hair to look like white people and then join the government and support Babylon. So one of the reasons why dreadlocks are important because you stand out. You're more natural. You're not a bald head. And so that idea of a bald head was also applied to Sierra Leone in that context. And then active resistance is really important. He's really about this. I know there's been some material, some scholars have looked at this, that in the West, he's really looked on as peace, love, togetherness. And there is that trend, that stream in Marley, no doubt. But the bigger issues that are drawn from Marley by people all over the world has to do with resistance in some way. And it comes through, and also to not be put down, this idea that you analyze, don't let them fool you or even try to school you. You have a mind of your own. That is a real, he brings this up on a regular basis. That idea that you're being put down and you might not even know it, but you are. And now you have to get up, stand up. So what about Tupac? So Tupac has an emotional range in work. And I was talking to Tom and Susan about this. I don't know of one artist who has an emotional range like Tupac, because he has incredible empathy. Keep Your Head Up is an example. Changes is another of his more famous songs that are quite reflective and empathic. And then he has a whole lot from the other side that are better known in worldwide, like Hit 'Em Up and Only God Can Judge Me, which was probably the most important song in Sierra Leone. And then his most famous song worldwide is All Eyes on You. So he's known for being honest. He always tells the truth. He tells you exactly what's on his mind. And it's often disturbing. And he is always fearless. He predicts he's going to die early. He talks about suicide. He talks about being trapped. All kinds of issues about that resonated to young people all over the world. And then the Rambo films, we were talking about this in parts of Asia. To this day, Rambo is connected to the American context in Vietnam, not in other parts of the world, not at all. Rambo is seen as somebody who can fight back as one person. He has low tech, and he always wins. And so he's super resourceful, and he can fight a whole army on his own. So he's, in a sense, he became this idea in a lot of places is, you know, if you're going to have the nickname Rambo, you're like the perfect warrior. And also for Sierra Leone, where did he fight? His first two movies take place in rainforests. So one's in Oregon. The next one is supposed to be in Vietnam. I think it was filmed in Thailand. So what is, or maybe the Philippines, I'm not sure. But the context is rainforest. What about Sierra Leone? Oh, it's all rainforest except the parts that were cut down for villages, you know, for rice fields, diamond mines. That's it. And the rest of it, when you fly over Sierra Leone, you're flying over a canopy. Most of the country is rainforest. So the origins of this book came from this 23 years ago, last month. I was in Gambia in West Africa interviewing Sierra Leonean refugees who had fled from what they called January 6th. Sierra Leone was 1999 when the rebels attacked Freetown, the capital, and committed some of the most horrific warfare I think we've ever seen in terms of terror-based warfare in modern history. It was the biggest war of that, the biggest battle of that war by far. And these were people who had escaped that battle and made their way eventually to Gambia. So before I started, my questions were about human rights for refugees and also the right to work for refugees. I was doing this for the Social Science Research Council. So before I started with my questions, I just said, so how did you get here? What's your story? And I had to get approval at this meeting in order to get into the refugee camp. All these adults from the refugee camp came to meet me. And a lot of them started to stand up, men and women, and talk at the same time. And the first group that stood up started talking. I kept hearing this word Tupac, and I thought, what are they talking about? And then there was this other group that jumped up later and were saying, no, Bob Marley. What is Bob Marley? And so I didn't know the context. And when everybody calmed down and slowly started to explain this to me, there were references to Rambo being used by the rebels by that time, and a little bit about Tupac, but nothing to the degree that I heard. This was very, very new information. And I started, like an investigative reporter in a way, I started tracking the story. And I found that everywhere I went, when I asked young people about Tupac or Marley or Rambo, the response was electric, and people couldn't believe that they were talking to a white man about this. They really were, it was kind of stunned, and we would have long conversations about all three, depending on the context. So this isn't just Africa, right? Tupac, for example, I had a long conversation in Pristina with youth in Kosovo. Colombia, another place. Northern Uganda, without question, that was big Tupac land in the early 2000s, and so on. So I over time, it was difficult to get funding for such an unusual research project. And thank God it took 23 years, but finally I got it done. Anyway, so here we are. And what happened was, I guess, so this is the previous picture was from the same bar this is a Koidu, this is in the diamond mine area in the east of Sierra Leone. Let me see if I can get the other one. Yeah, so I came into this bar and it was during the day, and I think I was doing some interviews there. And I come into the courtyard, and there probably were 10 murals of Marley. And so I chose this one, but I took a lot of photographs. And then right at the door, I turned, and there's Tupac. So, and it's got the medallion with his handgun, and then when he died. Anyway, so and then welcome. So the rebels who came into some parts of Freetown in January 6, 1999 were wearing They came in vans and pickups that were painted on the side were the names of some of his scariest songs, or the more electric songs of Tupac, like "Hit 'Em Up" and "All Eyes on Me," "Only God Can Judge Me," and I was told "California Love." And then they were high as is possible to be, very high on marijuana and other drugs, and were wearing Tupac t-shirts, and some of them were wearing bandanas because Tupac often wears a bandana, and they were playing his music, and they came out and they started their attacks. In other parts of the city, there were rebels with dreadlocks wearing Bob Marley t-shirts, listening to Bob Marley in their vehicles, coming out and then doing their attacks. So that's what they were talking about. Okay, so what is going on in Sierra Leone, and how, when I was trying to understand this, I had to go back into history of Sierra Leone. And this is a very, very small amount of the history that I had. My book goes all the way back to the period of the slave trade, which, by the way, I think we should remember is a lot longer than the post-slave era in this world. The slave trade era, the Atlantic slave trade era, lasted, I don't know, 400 years, 500 years, from the 1400s. And then up to, in Sierra Leone, I think domestic slavery was finally outlawed by the British in like 1926. So it hasn't been that long, the post-slave era. So of course that slave period had a great deal of influence. I'll mention a little bit in a moment. But here is Shaka Stevens, who ruled the country for 18 years. And here he's talking to, I think it's Kurt Waldheim, who was a general secretary for the UN many years ago. And he's Shaka Stevens. He's not that impressed now, is he? So what about Shaka? Well, what I learned about studying him and how he was described is that many scholars said that the government was actually a facade or wafer thin or something like that. And what I learned was that Shaka Stevens created a government that was intentionally weak. It wasn't supposed to be strong. He focused on his patronage network for extracting as many diamonds, as much money as he could from the diamond trade. So Sierra Leone used to have some of the most, I mean, a huge amount of the best, highest quality diamonds in the world, and they're alluvial. They're right there on the surface of the earth. So, so that's what he focused on. Government, not so much, except there were a lot of people in Sierra Leone who didn't like this setup and didn't like the very blatant, theft of all the diamonds, and nothing coming back to people, to roads, to schools, all that kind of thing. There was very little getting back. So, so in order to keep this system in place, he needed a lot of state violence. And since there were at least 2 coups, maybe 3, to overthrow him, he did not trust his army. He undermined his own army and created 2 units, security units, that he controlled. And those are the ones that led the attacks. Something that's very important about Sierra Leone is the Creole language. So freed slaves were brought back after the British, they were big in the slave trade, and then they were, abolition. And then they were capturing slaves on the high seas, and then in some cases, bringing them back to Freetown for freed slaves. That's why it's called Freetown. So, these people were known as the Creoles, and they were from different parts, largely West Africa, and they created this language, which was a Creole of English. So what's important is that for the study is that it allowed, Creole is really spoken by, it's estimated 95% of all Sierra Leoneans. And when you know Creole, when you listen to Marley, you understand him. When you watch a Rambo film, there's not a lot of dialogue, but what he says is very meaningful. you can understand it. Tupac is a little different. We'll get to that, but you certainly understand certain words. And the most important word that radiated across Sierra Leone from Tupac was motherfucker. And that word everybody heard. So youth alienation, this goes back to the slave period. Male youth, when during the war, the slave period, again, which went on for like 450 years. And during that period, the British in particular were focused only on male slaves. They weren't interested in females. So, and in order to get those slaves, they didn't have a lot of people. So they would give guns to both sides in a conflict. And whoever lost, they were taken as slaves by the winners and then given to the British, and they became slaves. So this is how the slave trade operated for centuries. And it created this historic and also unprecedented gender imbalance. In Sierra Leone, like a lot of traditional societies, if you know your name, you also know you're going to get married. And here, who are you going to marry? If you're a guy, I mean, if you're a female, who's going to marry you? Of course, polygamy was already there, but it expanded dramatically, particularly with wealthy Sierra Leoneans. But the imbalance created, the wars created this idea of the male youth being used as what they called war boys, and also started to be seen as something as bad as inherently bad people. And this comes up in the literature a lot. There's something wrong with them. They're just violent. They're bad. And one of the words that they're called on a regular basis is a tug or thug. And then for female youth, they're definitely subordinated, but because of this period where, according to scholars, that when there were so many more female youth or females than males, they were seen as very powerful, but also very dangerous. Their power came from outside of society, and so they had to be controlled by men, controlled in marriage and also controlled in society, that they were dangerous. And that idea, both of these ideas of male youth being dangerous, sort of the down and out male youth, and female or femininity as being quite threatening and powerful, are ideas that extend up to now. The last point is that peaceful dissent was harshly repressed. And this was really important because if you were a male youth under Stevens, there was nobody saying anything of particular interest to you because you couldn't speak out. So there were love songs, patriotic songs. When you're repressed, these songs aren't really interesting. So where did they go for their ideas? Okay, so this is another way of looking at the history in Sierra Leone since, well, around the independence era, which was 1960. So what happened? Well, in the late 1960s, in comes marijuana, and it's the first time it's come to the country. When it's planted, it grows. Oh my God! It grows 15 feet high. It's incredible. I've never seen marijuana that high. And the one that I remember vividly was behind the police station in Kenema, in one of the cities. And it is really strong. When I was growing up, I remember if you got Hawaiian weed, oh man, that's strong, right? So that's something like that was going on. Now, I put this picture of Marley and smoking a spliff because this was really important in Sierra Leone. This is a time of heavy repression by Stevens. And there was lots of youth who were resisting in their ways, really taking chances, particularly in the capital. And along comes all this reggae music, and they lock into this in a huge way. And of those, there was Burning Spear, there was Peter Tosh, and there was Marley. And Marley rose to the top and has stayed there up to today in Sierra Leone. And he became an inspiration for them. They would do this practice of becoming conscious by smoking marijuana and listening to Marley and getting ideas about the repression in their society. And so that comes out, these ideas are so laced into so many of Marley's songs that they were students of Marley in a big way and using it to see, I mean, they would say Marley was like a prophet. It's like he knew Sierra Leone. That's a funny thing because I've talked to people about Marley in other countries and they'll say, yeah, it's like he knew our country. Wow, this is one artist has been able to do this. So what about the 1980s? And I'm going to tell you something that is hard to believe, but my research really showed this, you know, it's corroborated so many times that this is the reality that I came to understand. So there were these guys who made their money with pickup trucks. They had a generator, they had a video player, and they had, I don't know, some cloth for a screen. And they would go from village to village, they would go to the diamond mines, and they would go to neighborhoods and cities, towns and cities in Sierra Leone, and set up an outdoor cinema. All these kids would come in, you know, you're under the stars, you sit down, you look up at the screen, who's up there? Rambo. And after a while, what did everybody want to watch? Only Rambo movies. Rambo, 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 Rambo. To the extent that when the war started and they used Rambo movies, the rebels used Rambo movies as military training videos, which we were saying was also done in Mindanao with the rebels there. They did not have to show the movies because all the kids had memorized them. All the children that they had abducted, all of them were abducted. Nobody joined of those children. And they were abducted and they'd say, do you remember in that first movie when Rambo did it? They'd say, okay, now we're going to practice Rambo tactics. And when they do, they'd enact what was going on in the film. And that was known as Rambo system. The whole thing was Rambo system. You're going to learn Rambo system to be a tough fighter like John Rambo. So that was the goal. What about this guy? Okay, so here comes Tupac. His work starts to arrive in the early 90s. The ex-combatants say 1991. When the war began. And what I realized was, if you can see, I put this picture up. So even now, you know, kids in Sierra Leone, the boys will, you know, do the Tupac or hip hop kind of stuff. Yo, Mr. Mark, how are you? I'm all right, man. Okay, so what does it say here? You can't see it all. It says thug life. And you got a bullet for the eye. And down in the T is a handgun. Imagine if you've been called a thug your whole life as being a loser, a bad person. Get out. Your whole life, before you even hear Tupac, you see this picture. He's not embarrassed about being a thug now, is he? Tupac's whole thing was, yeah, I'm a thug. You got a problem with that? Let me tell you why I'm a thug. Because nobody trusts me, because I'm living in a poor place, because I have to have a gun, otherwise I'll get killed, because they're selling drugs on the street, da 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 da. It's all in his music. And if you want to call me a thug, go ahead. Not only that, I'm going to rap without my shirt on so everybody can see that I'm a thug. So he talks about thug life in All Eyes on Me a lot, for example. So even before they heard his music, he was a hero in Sierra Leone to male youth. Nobody else. This is a guy, this was of the three, a lot of female youth looked up to Rambo. And adults liked Marley. Tupac, only male youth. Well, actually, after the war, some female youth. But during the war and when he first came in, he was their guy. Only their guy. In fact, the rebel leaders didn't like him. They called him a rude boy. That's a funny way to call him. Why is that? Because Marley was, his early songs were speaking to people in Trenchtown, in the slums of Jamaica, of Kingston, who were known as rude boys. The same kind of people, the kinds of boys that nobody likes, nobody wants around, in both places. So, okay, so what happened? Well, this is a picture. I took this picture in '98 before I knew what I was getting into. So I found this picture, and he's wearing an All Eyes on Me t-shirt, and he wanted me to take his picture. But then I didn't find out about this till 2 years later, how important it was, this t-shirt. So the youth turned to Marley for inspiration, as I think I've explained. And Tupac was like their friend. He knew what they were going through from another part of the world. And this is a very common theme with Tupac all over the world, is they identify with him, and he's like their friend. He's like he's talking to them like their friend from a long way away. And then the Rambo movies are really seen as pedagogical. I'll give you an example. There was this girl I interviewed. She was telling me this story. Sierra Leoneans would say some of them would never run. They would stay in their village till the rebels attacked. And so there was this phrase as, well, when the war came to us, right? They know the war is around, but they stay there. Some people leave, but a lot of people said, no, I'm staying. And then when the rebels, that's when the war came to them, and they attacked, and they were burning houses and everybody. And she ran for her life on her own into the rainforest, that was adjacent, that was surrounding her village. And so she runs into the forest and she stops, and you think, okay, so now she has to figure out, like, based on who gave her advice that she can use now for survival. Her father, her mother, her grandparents, her friend, some leader in the village? No. She got there and she asked herself, what would John Rambo do? And then she did that. So that's to give an example of how important they are. So the shared message is really something that was quite amazing. How these three weave together is all three say, they're blaming us. We didn't do anything. The system is against us, and we didn't do anything. As Rambo says several times in the first movie, but I didn't do anything. Why are you attacking me? I didn't do anything. He only fights after they press on him. And the idea is that the forces, those in power, are exploiting us, are pushing us down, and forcing us to resist. That's why we resist. Because we have to. So in all of these messages, the status quo is the problem. That's what they're fighting against. It's that system that's against them. The world is upside down. The world is perverse. So another thing that I learned doing this book is how terror works. Based on the Revolutionary United Front, and then they had other units, the West Side Boys, named after Tupac, and then the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council. So those are the rebel groups. And the first thing you do is, and this seems to be a recipe for violent extremist groups today as well, which is you exploit weaknesses in governments, where a place like Sierra Leone is pretty easy. Lots of corruption, lots of state violence. And if you're marginalized, are you going to get a school, electricity, roads, a clinic? Good luck. Maybe, probably not. Are you going to get all four? That's highly unlikely. Are you going to get harassed by the police? That's definitely likely. You have to pay bribes to get a service? Oh, obviously. That's Sierra Leone for most Sierra Leoneans. So another thing is, do you exploit alienated youth? The ones that we've been talking about are in societies all over the world. There's a lot of them here. Tupac is from here. There's a lot in Jamaica. That's Bob Marley country. So, and that's where they come from. Rambo's from here. He's a total outcast really shown in all three movies. So you exploit alienated youth, and for girls and female youth during the war, they were really kept as sexual slaves. Even the ones that were fighters were raped all the time. So from my analysis, mainly what happened to them was sexual slavery. And then with the boys, you capture them, you drug them, you manipulate them, and you make them your front for terror. And ISIS does the same thing today. They drug their fighters and send them out. They also enslave some of the females. The Christian Yazidi were all enslaved, for example, women that they took. So these practices are also present now. You terrorize civilians, but you don't kill a lot. This is something that is very common. The terrorists don't try to kill a lot of people. They try to scare a lot of people. You're not going to scare a lot of people if you kill them all. You usually kill some men. And then what you want to do is force a lot of them that you will control. You can't control everybody. So you want the rest to run away terrified, because it makes you show, it sort of demonstrates that you're more powerful than you really are. Because remember, these are drugged up kids, mostly. They're not that impressive as fighters, which is why, to this day, violent extremist groups and terror-based military outfits, they avoid fighting conventional war, military forces, national armies, and so forth, because they'll get wiped out. They know they'll lose. So they attack civilians and then go into the desert, go into urban areas, go into the rainforest. And then you need to run your operation. And in this case, it's diamonds. In West Africa now, it's gold. Alluvial gold is what violent extremist groups want to control, because they need money to run their operations. Okay. And then in Sierra Leone, you exploit pop culture icons for war. This is Bob Marley, Tupac, the makers of Rambo. None of them intended any of their work to influence war. They had to be exploited and manipulated by military leaders to fuel the war in Sierra Leone. So Marley and marijuana were really used together. Kids were drugged from the time they were abducted. And some would say the whole time I was with the rebels, I was high. They forced me to be high on marijuana and other drugs. How'd they do that? They boiled water with marijuana, and that's the water you drank. They took marijuana and they put it in your rice. They made sauces out of marijuana, because there's cassava leaf, there's potato leaf. There are different kinds of sauces made out of leaves of plants. And so marijuana became one of those. And as I think many of us know, when you eat marijuana, you stay high a long time, a lot more than smoking it. So, and then at night, the boys, not the girls and female youth, but the boys and male youth would be with their commanders at night, smoking marijuana and listening to Marley. Every night, some groups, damn straight, every night. Did they have dreadlocks? A lot of them. How about the Tupac groups? A lot of them shaved their heads. They had tattoos, different kinds of tattoos, like Tupac. They did the turn up, which is to pull up one trouser leg. Why is that? Because Tupac does that. So it depended which units. So for Marley and marijuana, that was the entire, everybody. In fact, the rebel side, the government side, everybody was listening to Marley. Everybody was smoking marijuana. The whole war on both sides. What about Tupac? There were some groups, he was popular with all male youth across the country, but the rebels used him, certain groups, for real extreme violence. And they were known to use cocaine. In addition, everybody used marijuana, but in addition, they used cocaine. And the Rambo movies, as I said, were used as military training videos to learn the Rambo tactics and the Rambo system. And then if you were a really tough warrior, you could gain a Rambo nickname. Young Rambo, Nasty Rambo, CO Rambo, Red Goat Rambo, and many others. And this is the Rambo bandana, or banderilla, or banda. It's a upside down American flag. That's what, this is a rebel, a picture of a rebel during the war. And so if you wore a bandana, that was like Marley, and that was also like Tupac. But this particular one was identified with Marley. So after the war, what happened? So with Rambo, you know, I think people wanted to stop thinking about war. So he kind of faded out. What about Tupac? This is a mural in Freetown after the war. So it kind of shows how complicated he is and his influences. So he's got West Side Boys, name one of the militias. Okay, the Crips, they put down, that's a gang in Los Angeles. Okay, but what does it say here? What you can see is the motto is truth, right? Because Tupac always tells the truth. That's what he's known for. This lady, does she like Tupac? Hell no, she doesn't like Tupac. Adults in Sierra Leone do not like this guy. Is he popular with young people? Of course, particularly males. Okay, and here's why. So this word sufferers actually is used by Marley a lot as well, a sufferer. He makes reference to that in some of his songs. So there are so many sufferers here. I used to hear about people who succeeded like Tupac. I'm from nowhere. A lot of youth all over the world can say that about themselves. But someday I can make it. Tupac is an example for us. Exactly. And what about Marley? So Marley connected and inspired Sierra Leoneans, and not just youth. And I just have a quote from a female youth at the bottom, like Bob Marley says, don't give up. So what they did is they took the ideas from Marley and Tupac and adapted them to adjust to the post-war context. For Tupac, they had to listen to other songs. You know, you're not going to learn about post-war adaptation from Hit 'Em Up, but from Changes, from Keep Your Head Up, absolutely. So they would listen to different songs that were more about post-war adaptation that would help them. With Marley, you just took the same song and adapted it to the post-war context. Like Get Up, Stand Up for Your Rights means don't be pushed down. It's no longer a war song. It's about don't let anybody put you down. Stand up for your rights. Stand up for yourself. You're somebody. So that's how it worked. So the last one, these are some gold miners in Sierra Leone. The book ends with a framework for what to do with all this information. And I really do believe there's so much we can learn from Sierra Leone, from these young people and the war. One of them is try to identify, think about what is it that you can learn from the upside down world of an alienated youth. You don't have to be in Sierra Leone to do this. What is it like to see the world where you feel like you're a permanent outsider? As you know, if you don't, there's a lot of adults who don't like Tupac. Try to listen to Only God Can Judge Me, or just look up the lyrics. I think they'll blow your mind, because what he says so many things in that song that are extraordinary. And one of them is, I've been trapped since birth, living with a curse. Holy smokes. And then something about imagining his family in a hearse. Wow. Hey, Mr. Police, can't you see? There's a million motherfuckers stressing just like me. Only God can judge me. You want to tell me that won't radiate with alienated people all over the world? Of course it does. So there's a lot to learn from trying to look at the world through the eyes of this young woman, for example. And then the second thing is if you look at governments, what do insurgents see? What do violent extremists see? What are they exploiting? Oh, now you're really seeing a society. Inequality is rising all over the world. Can poor people get access to services? If they go to a court, are they going to get the same response from the courts as a rich person? And again, I wanted to say, this is not just Sierra Leone or Africa or something like that. I remember Richard Pryor in one of his films of one of his monologues. He said, "Oh yeah, we know justice, just us." Right? How many people think that? Who's in jail? Who's in prison in America? A lot of Black people. Right? So, and then mainstream governance. Governance really, I mean, I found this at the State Department, that you know, we want to see governments as if there really is, for example, a Ministry of Justice. And there is. Is it meting out justice? Well, depends who you ask, I would say. So I think it's important to go in with that understanding of local context and then look at governments to see what they're really doing and what messages they're giving to people. Where are they building the new roads? Where are they not building the new roads? Just look at that, for example. So as I said, there's a lot to learn from this book. I understand you can buy one out there at a discount if you like. And that's it. I'll take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm Elizabeth. I'm a 7th-year doctoral student in the Department of Art, Art History, and Visual Studies. So my question, actually I have so many questions for you, but I'll only ask one at this point, is really coming from that kind of visual art historian side of me. And talking about or thinking about the importance of the image and how just all these really powerful images that you have included in your book that I'm assuming you took in
Yes,
your research. So also thinking about though kind of the ethics about that and engaging with the subjects and where their subjecthood like kind of lies, and then how do we are the the titles of the photographs, are they named like kind of like in I know we just saw, I don't know how it looks in the book, but just if you could kind of discuss that, if that's pertinent at all, about how as you were taking these photographs and then the decision to include them in the book and how to frame the photographs that you were taking and of the people.
Yeah, I find this, if you take pictures for a newspaper, nobody asks you these questions. But if you do for a book, they're going to ask you these questions. And thank you. During the period, I didn't know that I was writing a book for most of these pictures. And even when I started it, I wasn't sure if I'd ever finish it. But I always had permission to take that photograph. And certainly when I was doing interviews, I didn't take people's names as a way of protecting them. I never recorded them in case I, went through a police checkpoint and they wanted to listen, as a way of protecting them. So there were a lot of ethical strategies that I used doing this research. So, where these people are now. I mean, this picture for the cover was from 1998. And they had been with me all day long. This was a town called Masingbi, where it was surrounded by rebels at night, and they fought every night. And I was on a UN helicopter and flew in for the day. And, we were going in and out of, kids that weren't pressed into warfare. They were in schools. And so we were talking about like, I'm not in school anymore. And we were talking off and on all day. And at the end, they asked for the photograph. So I took the photograph. And that story would be accurate for all the pictures in the book. There was always, either a lot of times they requested the photographs. And then sometimes, I would say, would you like a photograph? And then it was up to them. Sometimes they said no. I wouldn't take the picture. So, yes.
Hi, Mark. My name is Christian. I'm a second year international development student here. I'm also a Rotary Fellow.
Ah, okay.
Yes. First of all, thank you very much. It was, well, that was mind blowing for me, right? So I had the pleasure to meet you at the Peace Conference in May in DC, but I couldn't listen to your talk.
You're
there.
from Brazil.
I'm from Brazil. Yeah, we met at the bus. So, but I was so happy when Susan said that they were bringing you here, because I had heard good things about your talk and your book, and congratulations. So what what intrigues me is, okay, so all this, when you were there, you noticed all this influence, this, especially culturally speaking, this influence of Rambo, of sorry, Bob Marley and Tupac. And then you started to get acquainted because you didn't know, probably, as you said, Tupac's work, for example, right? So you started to dig into that. And at what point, what was the line when you started to, okay, separate what's the cultural environment and influence, and how these figures, these characters, they influence the culture of the place, especially young people, and how this was being manipulated to war, to terror, and by guerrillas and all that. So what was, when did you start to distinguish that, and how was this process? Because it gets, it's really intriguing how, okay, this is the scenario, but then it was twisted, manipulated to be applied into that. So when was this click? How did it happen?
Well, I'm going to say two things about my research approach. And one is, which ended up as a book, I think I need to share with you because several Rotary people have asked about it. And it's called Trust-Based Qualitative Field Methods. And they're basically, those are the methods I've been using. When I taught a course at the Fletcher School on how to do, I was asked to do this. And I said, would you teach a course on how to do research, during and after wars? And I said, sure. I didn't realize at that point there was almost nothing written about the subject. So I had to create a lot of it. And later on, I drew from that material to write this book. And so the first point would be, for me, the first point of research is, why should anyone tell you the truth? And I think there are a lot of reasons to polish reality. And I think increasingly in the world, everywhere, people are worried about being surveilled. And so there are a lot of reasons. And when you're in a city and you're poor, you know that technically the way you're making a living is illegal. So you might not want to say, right away to some stranger what you really do. Okay? So in Sierra Leone, boys would sell drugs part-time so that they wouldn't get harassed by the police because the police controlled the drug trade. So that was a really smart thing to do. That was a protection strategy. So would you say that right away to someone like me? No, I wouldn't. But using sort of methods and allowing people to come to you, I don't use focus groups. So focus groups are kind of staged meetings. I use peer groups. So if I met you in Freetown and you were like, can I talk to this white guy? Where are you from? America. CIA? Who is this guy? What's he doing in my neighborhood? That kind of thing. So you might say, and then you'll lie and have some fun with that. But if I keep coming back day after day, and I prove to you that I'm really interested in who you are, and I actually know something, I'm not stupid, and I pick things up and I tell stories about what's going on in other parts of Sierra Leone, for example, or this, Tupac was really important. I'll tell a story about Tupac from another part of Africa or the world. And after a few days, then we have something in common and we want to have a conversation. And so you might decide to have an interview. But you could do it. You could say, okay, I'll meet you tomorrow. And I could say, okay. So if you say, I'll meet you tomorrow, and they say, so where do we meet? And what I'm saying is, it's your meeting, not my meeting. And then who's going to be at that meeting with us? Who do you want there? Who do you want there? Now it's a peer group meeting. And where do we meet? You have to decide, where is it safe to speak openly? Because I don't know. And all of a sudden, when I get there, you're my teacher and I'm your student. I'm just writing it down. So you're telling me about your life. And that's a dynamic I try to create. So if you rush through a place, you can't learn anything. If you try to, do a survey, if you try to do a quantitative survey in a place where everybody's doing something illegal, you're wasting your time. Of course they're lying. You get your data, it's going to be wrong, but you get your data, your end data sets, and you can run your data. It's going to be bullshit, but you can do it. So that's one of the things I do. Another one is for analysis is, I interviewed a lot of, war zone commanders, war zone combatants. If you want to analyze that work, the first thing you have to do is don't judge. What's it like to be that person? You think they had a choice? No, they didn't have a choice. So what is it? What's it like? So in other words, don't judge when you're doing the interviews, and try to understand what it's like to be that person and what that environment was like. Once you know that, then you can do your analysis based on, corroborating evidence and so forth, and then, write it down. But I think those two processes of trying to cultivate trust and then not judging are really important. Because I didn't go through that war. I was there a couple of times, but that doesn't mean anything. So it was really incumbent on me to be taught, I guess. So that's what I do. We're getting just this side of the room, by the way.
There's so few of us over here too. My name is Kate. Thank you so much. This was incredible. I'm not a Rotary Peace Fellow, but I am in the Master of International Development Policy program with a lot of my colleagues here. And I'm actually, I'm coming from the federal government, and I'm focusing my studies on kind of the intersection of multimedia and pop culture strategies and behavior change interventions, and focusing on the African continent, mostly Eastern Africa. But my question is, if you've seen from your presentation, it's clear that pop culture and media in general influences behavior. And so my question is, if you've seen these pop culture strategies used for the purpose of aid implementation. So, and I'm specifically interested in government, like USAID, for example, or United Nations. And if they are using this knowledge about pop culture and its influence in some of their behavior change interventions in Africa.
Yeah, sometimes. UNDP likes to do peace concerts where they call it peace and everybody comes in and talks about peace. I don't know. Does that resonate to people if they live in a violent slum? I don't know. Usually not. If it's and so is it authentic if it comes from outsiders? I mean, who's doing the playlist? I'd like to know.
Sure.
And I think a more so sometimes it must work, sometimes it might not. If I was, you can always use Marley and have some credibility, but I think more interesting would be to find out what people are listening to and why, and why those songs are so important. And if there's peaceful dissent that's allowed in the country, if there's not, then they got to turn to international stars. But if there is peaceful dissent allowed, some of those musicians, and a lot of them these days are rappers, tell you incredible realities. All you got to do is, if you get a CD, whatever, play it in your taxi. You just ask the taxi driver, so tell me about that song. 9 times out of 10, the person will be amazed that you're interested and have immense amount to tell you. And if you then understand the local song, use that
Right.
and use the realities that that person is trying urgently to communicate.
And have you seen that done successfully?
No, but I think that it would be a good idea. Usually it's somebody like Bob Marley or somebody who's, you know, like an unthreatening song about it,
Right. Right.
'Cause some of them are mixed together, but you don't emphasize, like Talking Blues. Do you guys know Talking Blues? Cool Ground was my bed last night, and Rock was my pillow too. And he's got the I3, and it sounds like it's going to be I'm going to stare in the sun and everything. And then the second chorus, this is Marley. He does this. He'll sneak in, you know, like a beautiful song, and then the second chorus, not chorus, stanza, I guess, and he just comes in and he goes, "'Cause I feel like bombing a church now." You guys know this? "Now that I know the preacher is lying, and who's gonna stay at home when the freedom fighters are fighting." Now that's what people listen to all over the world. But scholars have shown that in the West, they're listening to, "I'm gonna say," you know, the other parts of the song, "in the sun." When the real stuff is driven home, somehow a lot of people tune it out. But that's when people turn out the music and say, "What did he just say?" Freedom fighters, corrupt preachers. Ooh,
Thank you.
you know what I mean?
So we've gone over a little bit. He might be here for a few minutes if y'all want to talk to him directly, but I want to give another round of applause and say thank you for coming out to
You're
the John
welcome.
Hope Franklin
Yeah.
Center.